Folks, I'm really honored to have the next guest into our studio, Karen Justice Guard from Safe Havens. Welcome, Karen.
Hi.
Karen, why don't we start with the basics? What is Safe Havens?
Well, first, it's a safe place. It was really my experience, strength, and hope. Knowing when I ended up on welfare and walked away from the house on the golf course and the husband and my restaurant and all that stuff that we think we need, and end up losing because we had wrong motives, and really lost the ability to find what we really wanted, who we really were, and kept finding the situations that got us into trouble and kept repeating it. It's like that saying when they say, you keep doing the same thing over and over, that's just total insanity.
Oh, yes.
So I ended up on welfare and walked away from everything. And the difference was this time I had children. And I had sobriety for about 8 years. And I ended up picking up drugs for a little bit. And the difference was I had these beautiful children.
Oh, yeah.
And that made me take a look at what I was doing, And so I walked away from everything and went up to Tahoe and got back in the 12-step process and meetings and went back to college and ended up in the disability classes. And because I really didn't want to really work hard, and with welfare at that time back in, I think it was 95, they gave a lot of support and help, but I also saw what a trap it was.
Oh, yeah.
So as my motives were changing through different behavior, I got a little more money, and so I took college classes. I didn't know at the time that every time I kept showing up to the college classes and raising my hand, that was building my self-esteem. When you do such bad behavior, you really break down that self-esteem.
Oh, yeah.
And you start losing yourself. So also they offered me Head Start for my daughter, and I had to do 20 hours a month, and going back to college and going to my meetings, and it was just this process of really, wow, where did I end up? What am I doing? How do I change this? But also seeing what a trap welfare was and the stigma that it put on, and that was starting to lower my self-esteem.
Well, if I could break it down, in one angle I would say Safe Havens is getting off welfare, getting people back to work. Safe Havens also is protection for the little people, the ones without the voice, those who I think are the silent sufferers, if I could say, in domestic abuse. How would you classify the program? Is it aimed at women? Is it simply welfare to work? How would you break it down for our listeners, Karen?
Well, abuse is abuse, and it comes with no color, no stigma of how much money you make. So Safe Haven is really about getting a safe place to take a look at what abuse you're in.
Okay.
If it's men, women, or children.
Okay.
It's a generation mindset also. And you have to really, to change a person, you need to change a community also.
Exactly.
So that's, I think, the message as Safe Haven in the last 11 years has been evolving. It keeps evolving into a bigger, safer place as a community where it's at today. And today we're servicing from men out of prison, parolees, to women out of prison, to domestic violence survivors, and children. And it's breaking the mindset. Because one thing that I found when I had ended up on welfare and then became a certified welfare to work program for Safe Haven is that a lot of our clients were third and going to fourth generation of a mindset of being raised on welfare. And that's the barriers that I found that Safe Haven had to step up to. And that's where this 12-step solution has come in, and also the WELL program, Work, Earn, Live, and Learn. It's a process. You just don't come in with a mindset and think, oh, I've got a job now, I'm going to a meeting and my life's going to change.
Oh, yeah. Karen, I wanted to turn the clock back then in time. We've gotten a little sense of how Safe Havens got started, but take us back in the early years. What was your life like? What led you to Safe Havens?
Well, first I'm an identical twin, so growing up was always kind of on the spotlight, always, I really didn't like being a twin because I hated that judgment. who's better, who's prettier, who's smarter, who does this differently. So that really gave me this sense of who am I, you know?
Mhm.
And then we're totally different. And always being compared, it made me want to be even more different.
Mhm.
So we ended up dropping out in 10th grade. My parents had gotten a divorce at 13. You know, that same
Yeah.
saga that families fall apart. And they were very young, 15 and 16. So when they got divorced, when we were 13, 14, they were 32 years old.
Uh-huh.
And they had never lived life.
Yeah.
So, you know, just going through their times and back and forth with the parents, I moved out at 16
Wow.
and had a boyfriend, and I was a very responsible young lady. You know, I worked really hard, I owned my own car, never had done drugs, and just was, you know, just trying to live life and
Mhm.
find my independence. When I was 18 and a half, I had met a gentleman that had done all the travel for big celebrities backstage, and from Fleetwood Mac to Rod Stewart, all over the world.
Like the travel arrangements?
Yeah, all the travel arrangements.
Okay.
So the next thing I knew, I was dating him, and I was a fry cook in Danville.
Wow.
And
Okay.
I'm backstage and going to concerts and limousines and the fast party life.
Uh-huh.
Well, knowing that, I remember one night I went to bed and I saw everyone in the living room, and they were all doing cocaine, drugs. And I went to bed because I had to get up for work. And when I got up in the morning, they were all still at the same backgammon boards and still up.
Wow.
You know, 3 months later, I was right with them. And that's what happens with addiction, is that you end up, your community or your atmosphere, you will end up becoming that atmosphere. And,
That's true.
And that's what I did. It was exciting, it was fun. All of a sudden, I was getting all this attention from my family and friends because didn't you know who I was? I'm going backstage and meeting all these celebrities, taking people to concerts, and this was back in the 80s. Cocaine
Yeah.
was the thing to do. And so that's what we did. So from there, I finally, you know, in any type of drug-induced state, relationships don't last and abuse comes. And not necessarily that we had physical abuse. There was one episode, but it was time to move on because I met his smugglers. And at that time, I ended up living with the big drug lords.
Really?
Yeah, and I was young and naive and didn't even know about addiction. Just was nowhere to go, and they had a baby and I became their nanny. And I loved children. And, you know, I took really good care of the baby, but it was still in this whole drug era.
Wow.
And then their friend, who was the top smuggler that brought it all into the States, started dating me. So now, didn't you know who I was? I was special. I was this young girl that had all this drugs and money and traveling and...
The top Mexican mafia smuggler. Wow.
Well, that came later. That
Oh.
was just that later to escape a situation. One of the Mexican mafia guys that was over to do their thing was talking to me, and we got really along well, and I couldn't get out of the situation. I was fearing for my life. And he ended up getting me out, and I just ended up living in the Oakland Hills in a beautiful $1 million home and Ferraris, and never had to leave a house, and opened a drawer, and I was smoking heroin. And I didn't know how I got there. I mean, I do today, but you know when you just keep meeting bigger people,
Yeah.
and that was my life. And here I was, this young girl that grew up with no drugs and a affluent family, and ended up in this situation. And I stayed in that situation for 17 months till my life was threatened again, and I had to leave, and ended up leaving the state to get away from the Mexican mafia.
Folks, we'll continue our conversation with Karen Justice Guard in next week's show. You can read the book. It's called Keep Showing Up, Living and Healing Beyond Welfare and Abuse. You'll find it on Amazon.com.